Ash off of his honeymoon tonight by Mr. Dan, the movie man, Rockwood. What's going on, man?
Oh, not much. It's not really fresh off. I've had some time at home to kind of get my head straight and, figure out life and all that. But I haven't been on a podcast in forever. So this is really exciting. And I'm happy to be here and happy that this movie we had was a poll movie. So, the audience voted for this and we watched it and we're going to talk about it. So I'm excited for that.
And that movie in question, of course, is My Girl, the 1991 drama with like sprinkles of comedy in it and a pretty heavy ending. Let's just put that out there. I don't know about you. I guess this is the first question I want to ask. I knew, much like how Tim Curry's Pennywise It movie was, I knew how that ended, and I knew how that ended because all my friends growing up, that was kind of like a staple of their childhood, to where it was like, hey, we're gonna just watch this scary clown movie and then be traumatized the rest of our lives about it, and it's gonna be cool. So I stayed away from it, but I knew how it ended. And this movie, I didn't know anything about it other than Macaulay Culkin was in it, and I knew in the end, spoiler alert, he dies by bees. I knew that. And I don't know what your experience was, but this was kind of like one of those things that I felt got really hyped up in the schoolyard because all my friends had seen this. And watching it as an adult for the first time, yes, this is my first time watching My Girl. This was just a different than I expected experience.
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily hyped for me. So this movie came out in 1991, so the year I was born. I turned 30 this year, same age as this film. And I caught it on TV when I was maybe like 10 years old, and I didn't watch it all the way through. So I had never actually seen the ending. So when my wife and I sat down to watch it together, we were going through it. She really didn't know anything about it. I did know the ending more recently. That was spoiled for me. I think I saw like a screenshot online of one of the final scenes. I was like, oh, okay, so that happens. I'm still I don't know how I feel about this movie. Like, I liked it, but at the same time, there's it makes sense for a mental health podcast because there's a lot of mental health stuff going on in this movie. But yeah, I don't know if it's executed well. I'll say Dan Aykroyd and Jamie Lee Curtis were huge positives in this film. Like, I really enjoyed any time they were on screen. The kids were, they were great, but I don't know if it was enough to carry this movie for the 102 minutes of runtime that it clocks in at. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think it was good, but I wasn't actively enjoying it as I was watching it, and that's kind of where my head's at right now.
So there's a commonality between us and this movie. Like you said, happy 30th birthday, My Girl. I don't know if you're 30 yet or if you're on your way to being 30, but congratulations for reaching such a milestone in your life.
Thank you.
And also being memed along the way, because this movie, for as sad as it is, has just been, for some reason, like the ending of Thomas J, Macaulay Culkin's character, and the B movie just kind of got simultaneously memed around the same time, and I don't know why. And when I announced it on our Instagram that we were going to be doing this stream tonight, one of our listeners, Corey, whose old band used to be our intro, posted on there. He's like, yeah, you guys should do a double feature with the B movie. And I was like, don't know how I feel about that one.
I mean, I think it would work out perfectly. That's the B movie is another one I have not caught yet. I have seen there's a YouTube video that it goes faster every time someone says the word B, and the entire movie is on there in 6 minutes because it just gets to a point where it's going light speed. But this as sad, I mean, I don't just want to jump right into the ending. There's a lot to talk about, but like as sad as the sad parts of this movie were, it almost felt like the characters in the movie were not as sad as I felt they should have been. Like it seemed like they very quickly just skipped kind of to the acceptance phase of, oh, Thomas J, those bees were always going to get him eventually. So guess it happened now, and he's gone. And really, like the most emotion we see is from Veda herself when she goes to this casket and is saying, he can't see without his glasses. Why isn't he wearing his glasses? Also, I question, supposedly Jamie Lee Curtis would have likely done the makeup on him, and I don't think she had done a very good job if you could still see the bee sting marks. Those seem to be things that you could, having done the research in mortician type makeup that I have, you should be able to cover those up. Now, if you are a makeup artist for the recently deceased, please chime in and let us know, how you would go about covering up bee stings or other signs of, anaphylaxis like that, because I just want the details. Maybe in 1991, they just didn't have the technology.
Well, I mean, this movie takes place in 1972, so you also have to kind of take into consideration for that. The 90s were like this like really unique time where they were trying to have these like random stories like My Girl and a movie we covered earlier this year in Girl Interrupted, where it would just take place and like random like spots in time that just didn't really seem to affect the story at all. And I don't know how you felt about this taking place in the 70s. I'm kind of curious because for me, like, I feel like you literally could have plucked this story out of 72 and placed it in 85 or 97 or just, whatever time period you wanted to do. Like, it doesn't really feel like it has a hindrance on the narrative that they're trying to tell.
Yeah, this movie could have taken place any decade. And the point where it tells you in the beginning, there's a text on the screen that says 1972. But if you happen to miss that, there aren't that many obvious signs of the time period. Apart from if you pay attention to some of the cars that are being driven, there are some references to like Nixon, usually in the, in the voiceover that's happening, which I did not notice was even happening until like the third or fourth time it happened. I thought maybe that it was just her talking out loud to herself. So it took me longer than it should have to realize that there was like an active voiceover going on throughout the movie. But no, strange decision to set this in 1972. Like you think of more recent properties, like Stranger Things on Netflix is very much set in the 80s and is based on a lot of that nostalgia of 80s pop culture. This didn't lean into like any of the pop culture of the 70s. It was just this coming of age story that could have just as easily been set in the modern day that it was filmed in the early 90s as it was in the early 70s. So kind of an interesting writing choice that I don't want to say it wasn't successful, but it didn't, like, picking a time period for this movie was not the purpose of the film, and it's not something that adds or takes away to it.
Yeah, the only thing that it really you kind of see from that era is the fashion, and even that just kind of feels like Jamie Lee Curtis's character. And
I was gonna say, in her camper too, like that had a very 70s vibe to it, which I totally dug.
Okay, all right, so like very minor details of her character, but even as the film goes on and her and Dan Aykroyd get married, it is that time of 70s nostalgia seemed to phase because she just kind of goes into like a more of like a timeless look. And I don't know, like to me, to like set it in the 70s, and I know it's such a weird gripe to have with a film, it felt really weird, a really weird choice to make from like a plot decision.
It freaks me out that this movie takes place over the course of one summer. They meet up. Dan Aykroyd and Jamie Lee Curtis meet before the 4th of July. We see them together on like a date during the 4th of July. And then by the end of the summer, so 6 to 8 weeks later, they're getting married. this movie moves so quickly, and maybe it's a comment on life just moved slower back then, and now we're just in a rush, so 2 months feels faster than it actually is. Maybe back then 2 months was an eternity. I don't know. But so much is covered in the course of this film in a very short amount of time. And honestly, the whole thing would have been more believable if they didn't get engaged, if they didn't need to feel like they had to get married by the end of the movie.
Yeah, that to me really felt like you said, like it's crazy to think about how quickly time moves in this movie when you're thinking about this is all 3 months.
Yeah.
And like I don't know, for me it's just weird to think about because like I know for this is the problem I have when it comes to like how romance is treated in movies, because for me and my wife, like we knew we were going to be together and we knew we were going to marry each other, but we courted for a year, dated for a year, were engaged for a year before getting married.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you and your now wife, like you guys have been together for a long time before you guys got married, and you guys were together for a long time before you even got engaged. And this is kind of my problem when it comes to Hollywood romance takes, is like they make everything feel like such a fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for the escapism of these films and things kind of fitting neatly in. And when you really look at it, unless you're looking at like a long a piece that takes place over the course of many years or decades, I mean, you're going to get that constrained time period no matter what. I mean, you look at a film like The Matrix, which you have Neo and Trinity falling in love, and it's not really decided upon how many days pass, how many weeks are passing, but you know it's a little while, but it's not as long as if Keanu Reeves was actually training day in and day out to learn kung fu and all of his moves. But the fact that any movie that tries to take place over summer vacation, which I mean I like that. I like focusing the story. Okay, The Sandlot took place over one summer, another great 90s film. Recess, School's Out, completely set during summer vacation. Like, there's some really cool stories that can be told during summer. I think this movie would have worked fine in that way if they focused more on Veda, on Thomas J, but they tried to have this like B plot in there of Dan Aykroyd and Jamie Lee Curtis courting, getting together, and getting married. And like, I like their relationship. Like, I thought it was really sweet the way they got together. Little questionable that he's basically her boss and they begin dating. But again, it was the 70s, and I approach Jamie Lee Curtis's character as a independent, powerful woman, and can is more in charge of that relationship. It feels like when she's when they're flirting, and you can kind of see that there is definitely interest there. I especially appreciate when Dan Aykroyd kind of sticks up for her when her ex-husband comes to try and take the camper back, and he ends up punching him in the gut, which, like, okay, that's assault, so that's a big deal. But they don't, in fairness, he invited them to sit down and have some burgers and hot dogs. It's a whole thing. So things just move at such a lightning pace in this movie. And that's where it comes to my question of what was the point of this film? What was the writer and the director trying to get across? Because ultimately what you have is a very young girl going through some very serious emotional and mental trauma, not really understanding how to navigate that. And then she has her friend Thomas J, who is like a friend, and it's like maybe if they were a little bit older, that would turn into like maybe a boyfriend type situation, but it tries to keep it really innocent and really young. And I like seeing that dynamic, and it's cool just seeing them, enjoy summer vacation together. But then you have all of these other things going on, and there's a lot of foreshadowing here for Thomas J's fate, which I appreciated from a writing perspective, just how well how many hints there were throughout the movie of what would ultimately happen to him.
Yeah, I do have to say though that I think that to your point that it does question who this movie is for, because this movie, it definitely deals with a lot of as you've mentioned, trauma and a lot of heavy topics in this way, and it brings up some really interesting topics to talk about. And I think that a friend of mine, Chris Barkham, who's been on the show before, and he's also the writer of the indie comic The Amazing Adventures of Superior Sam, which basically is an all ages comic book. And when his deal with his original artist was getting ready to expire, the last issue that they wanted to do was how to talk to kids about death. And that's such a heavy topic when you're kind of talking about it, because adults, like, we understand that, like, as humans, like, we are born, we're here on earth for a little bit, and then we die. And where we die, depending on what you believe, can range from anywhere from heaven to hell, to purgatory, to reincarnation, to just going back in the ground. And kind of the catalyst for what I feel like this movie, and I think it's making Dan Aykroyd's character a mortician. I think it invites that conversation a lot more. The fact that here you have a daughter whose mother died in childbirth. The movie goes on to talk about how she gave birth to Veda and then died 2 days later. And so Veda kind of has this weight on her chest towards the end where, she even says, did I kill my mother? And it's such a heavy thing to kind of talk about. And then at the end to kind of lose Thomas J. I don't know about, like, how old were you the first time that you really had to process the losing somebody to, like, any form of death?
Personally, it didn't really hit me until high school. Probably I had some pets that had died prior, which I would argue can hurt just as much, if not worse, than some of your human companions passing away. However, that being said, I was raised by two paramedics, so the concept of death and injury and dismemberment was never a shy topic in our household. My grandmother was a nurse. I mean, I come from healthcare, a healthcare family, a medical family. So it was very practical and very textbook when discussing death and causes of death. But the first wake I ever attended, I would have been a freshman in high school. And so I was probably 14 years old at the time. And I had a little bit more time to process things than Veda is in this film. But I just remember the first words out of my mouth when I told there's a family member who died. And my first words were, well, that really sucks. And I had no other words other than that. And the person delivering the news to me was my stepdad at the time. And he burst out laughing when I said that. And I was like, I don't know what else to say. It's God's honest truth. Like, this sucks. But he had been sick for a while. We knew this guy was not long for this world. And personally, everyone grieves in their own way. If I have a little bit of notice, I handle things better than if it's sudden. Because sudden, that's a shock to your system. And I'm not saying that if you know someone going through a prolonged illness or are, struggling, I'm not saying that that's easier. I'm just saying that for me personally, I can anticipate that ultimate, well, they are no longer with us. And that helps my grieving process kind of get jump-started a little bit sooner. And I can accept and move past it a bit more quickly.
Yeah, I was, unfortunately, I didn't have that luxury. I was a little bit younger than Veda was the first time that I experienced death. I lost my grandmother to leukemia when I was 10, and it really hurt me. Like, for me, like, losing someone so young to, going from seeing someone literally every day to just one day, oh, you can't see her anymore. it was kind of like this culture shock for me, to where I didn't really know how to process it. And I kind of think that, it's a touchy subject to talk to kids about. We're a nonprofit that is trying to create content like this to educate and engage people for mental health awareness. And so that way, right now, we're trying to also, hopefully, one of our goals in the next 5 years is to be able to come into schools and talk to kids about mental health awareness and kind of how your body changes and processes things different. And I think a large portion, some of that also is how death affects our mental health. And I texted a friend of mine who was on our Wonder Woman episode, Kate. She's I don't exactly know what her job title is, but she has a degree in child development, and she said that like it's about 3 or 4 that a child can actually process death, and that just blows my mind.
Yeah, I know when I think it was after my grandmother had passed. I have a young nephew. He's around 4 or 5, and my mom, by accident, made some comment of my grandmother had died, and he basically asked, well, what does that mean? My mom was like, I should not be the one to have this conversation with you, but you asked and we're in it now. I'm a huge proponent of kids are able to handle a lot more than I think adults give them credit for. I don't really believe in sugarcoating or shielding things from children. I think that so long as you can have a mature conversation with them about it, allow them to ask the questions they want to ask, they're able to understand a lot more than you probably give them credit for. I think the reason a lot of adults will tiptoe around this is because they're protecting themselves more so than the child. And I know I'm not a child psychologist. I'm not a parent. That's just from my experience, having been a kid and being spoken to in certain ways, and now seeing how kids react, when they're treated like a peer and when they're treated with respect. I think that's really the best thing you can do. And that's something that we see Veda go through in this movie, that she is, the way she interacts with adults, it's like she's trying to play act as an adult throughout the movie. And we understand shortly, not too long into, that she has a major crush on her teacher in school and wants to join his adult creative writing class over the summer. And so she steals the $35 poem about ice cream and how delicious it is, to really finding the words to articulate how she's feeling by the end of the film. And it's just so amazing to see that character development in how she progresses in that writing class, and know that, she has these adults around her that are going to treat her like an adult, and they're going to critique her writing and give her advice and help her grow. And that was really cool to see. It also helps that I'm a full-time writer, so it's, I was able to relate to those moments when they were going through and just figuring out, how do you describe your emotional state with words, and we could see her learning that.
No, I absolutely loved her character traits. I think that she had a great arc through line throughout the entire film. I think one of the things that really solidified her as such a likable character in my mind was her sense of humor. And some of the funniest scenes, I think, is when she goes to the doctor, and it's established pretty early on is that she basically has this habit of whenever the local hospital brings a dead body to her father to prepare for the funeral, she then infers that she has caught whatever they died of. And I think ultimately that also reflects when Thomas J dies from the bee stings, and she kind of almost has this like empathetic quality to her, but there's a lot of charm that I think her character has. And there was a 1994 sequel that I considered watching after I finished this. And I'm kind of like you. Like I didn't really like this. I didn't hate this movie, but I didn't like it. So I'm kind of like at an impasse where it's like it was all right. But I think if I did end up watching it, it would probably be for her character. I just think that she had some really terrific quips throughout the course of the film.
Yeah, it makes me think of like what was the national state of mind that made this movie a classic and made it like as well received and acclaimed as it was. Because I think you could release a movie like this today, and I don't necessarily see it getting as much traction as it maybe did back then. But the early 90s, I was too young to remember, so I don't really know what the psyche was like at the time, but I feel like this movie maybe hit in just all the right ways. And I don't have my timeline in mind, but was this one of Macaulay Culkin's earlier roles? Was this before Home Alone and everything, or was this like right around the same time?
This was a year after Home Alone, because Home Alone was 1990.
Okay, so he had already been well recognized and was a pretty well-known name at that point.
So can we talk about how Thomas J for just a few minutes? Because
yes.
I wrote this in my notes as I was watching this film, that I don't understand how he is Aykroyd and Jamie Lee Curtis. I would argue that they are the main plot, and Veda and Thomas J are actually the B plot, because the story is told through how she interprets the world around her. So she's very much the main antagonist of this film, and they just happen to be the storyline that we spend the most time with. And Thomas J to me feels like a B plot, because I even wrote in my notes, I was like, how does he become so iconic with this role? He's barely in this movie. Like, we're 25 minutes in, and I feel like I've only seen him for which ironically we're also 27 minutes into this podcast. I feel like we barely spent any time with him, and then the second half of the movie, like once they get engaged, it kind of seems like a catalyst to kind of like switch those roles to where it's inevitable that she's going to be the new mom and dad's going to be happy again. So Thomas J is going to be like the friend who is kind of like almost like the you know what I'm trying to say, that she's trying to, like, she doesn't want to have a new mom, and she's kind of like trying to process this new event in her life. And then he kind of seems like he takes a more predominant role, but this movie, I don't know, he just feels like he's in this movie for like not that long, and yet he's in all of the marketing for this movie.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because, once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, I noticed that too, that he is really not in it very much. And the scenes that he is in, I mean, there's some of the key, most memorable scenes in the movie, right? Where they, after she gets her period for the first time, she thinks she's dying, she's hemorrhaging. Jamie Lee Curtis explains, no, this is very natural. It's a thing that happens. And she, she afterwards shares that kiss with Thomas J. Very quick, very innocent, just like, hey, we should just try it. They had that initial scene where he knocks the beehive down and they have to run through the forest and they jump into the lake. And it's just, there's a lot of scenes of just them just having fun, like just being kids and just being outdoors. And there's you mentioned earlier, Stephen King's It, which I believe came out the same year, the one with Tim Curry. And then we just got the film adaptation in the past several years, parts 1 and 2. And there's something that is just so refreshing, I feel, about summer vacation and specifically kids just either going on adventures or enjoying themselves. I think that's why movies like The Goonies are so successful. It just shows you're getting... It reminds a lot of people either of their childhoods or it is something relatable to kids who are watching the movie, especially if a movie comes out during the summer and they're on summer vacation. I know when The Dark Knight came out, I wanted to dress up like Batman so bad and go around fighting bad guys and saving the city. I did not do that. But I went to the theater like 3 times that summer to see that movie because I loved it so much. But there's these movies, it's like they get into your mind and they stay there and they live there. And I think that Macaulay Culkin's Thomas J., even though not being in the movie that much, the scenes he had were really good. I'm still questioning the thing that I'm really struggling with is, and it comes back to what is the purpose of this movie? What was the purpose of him dying? Why was his death? Was it meaningful? And I'm not sure that it was. And I'm really curious to see what your thoughts are.
So, I probably about, I want to say, so 2 years ago was 10 years since a friend of mine committed suicide. And a part of my reflection and kind of like healing process on kind of that anniversary was I wrote a poem. And in that line, I said, suicide always feels fantastical until you understand the weight of its reality. And I think for Veda, something similar happens to her, that she's heard about death her entire life until it actually shows up on her front door.
Got it.
And so my reasoning and kind of my interpretation for why Thomas J dies is the same, is to kind of like give her character like actually understand the weight of death and the gravity of it. Similarly to kind of like, and I'm just kind of speaking from experience, like before I lost a friend to suicide, I knew suicide was a thing and I knew it existed and I knew mental health was a thing and that it had issues, but I never really understood the gravitas of that until losing someone. And so I kind of feel like that's the same way that this film handles the death of Thomas J, is simply to kind of give Veda that feeling of death and to kind of know that she has lost someone. And it sucks that is kind of the only reason that he is ultimately in this script, because he doesn't serve a purpose elsewhere.
I mean, that's way better than anything I had. And I think you're spot on that there's a moment when Jamie Lee Curtis is talking to Dan Aykroyd and she says she's confused about death. She doesn't understand what it is. She lives in a funeral home. She's around it constantly, but you've never spoken with her about what it actually means and what happened to these people. I think with Thomas J, there's a concept in journalism of mass murder is a statistic, but a single tragic death is a headline and a story. And it's people are able to very quickly separate themselves from large numbers. When a tragedy happens, they're able to look at the numbers and not think about the individuals, and they can say, wow, that's awful, but they don't think about the individual lives, the connections, the people left behind. But you have a single person, especially that's a hometown, someone that was well known, someone who is well loved or appreciated. That is a story that is going to tug at heartstrings. That's where you're going to see interviews with family. That's where you're going to learn more about what this person's life and legacy was and what their death actually means. And so I think that this movie kind of tackles that in the way that we see, in some cases, literally these faceless corpses come in under the sheets, and they pass in and out, and it's just business as usual. But when Thomas J passes, it's like for a moment the world stops, and you spend time with that loss. And I agree with you that I think Veda is really, for the first time, processing what does it mean for someone to be gone, and they're not going to come back. And how do I process that now as the person being left behind? I felt for a long time, and I know this is dependent on religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs. When it comes to funerals, it is of my opinion, they are more for the living soul. Whatever comprises the soul will have passed on and will likely be in peace, kind of regardless of what you do with the earthly remains. But I do think it gives the living the opportunity to say goodbye and process that loss in a way that makes sense, which is why people ask me, what do you want to do? What do you want done with your body when you die? Truth is, doesn't really make much difference to me. I'm not going to be here to really worry about it. However, just go with cremation, because burial is expensive and we are running out of room on this planet as it is. So I'll be happy to become one with nature there. But it's something worth thinking about. And I think movies like this, there maybe weren't a lot of movies before this that maybe focused on death in such a guttural kind of way. But I think as we moved through the 90s into the 2000s, we got some really, really well done films. I'm really looking at what loss means. I feel like The Green Mile did a good job at that, based off the Stephen King book. Really focus as well, John Coffey, the concept of someone dying or being killed and being able to bring them back and fix it, and the miracle and the way that he worked was really good. And then, they're just take your pick of horror films where you have your cast of characters just kind of being picked off one by one. So we have the whole gambit of what death means in these movies. In My Girl, they move from a very broad detached version to a very personal, this is now a personalized loss that Veda now has to deal with.
Yeah, and death is something that's interesting to talk about, because it not only affects you as a person, but it affects your relationships that you and that person also shared. There's that moment at the end where her and her father are going to get ice cream, and Thomas J's mother actually stops by the ice cream parlor, and they kind of have this brief exchange a couple weeks after Thomas J's death. And you can kind of see that, his mother truly valued Veda as a individual, not just as a friend of her son, but truly as a, one could almost argue as an honorary daughter. And you can kind of see also how that relationship is affected by that. It seems like, they both had to have some healing. And now that they've had that individual healing, it looks like now they're going to start processing the together healing, if that makes sense. The more
trying to think. Corporate healing is the word that I'm trying to think of. And I think for me, like in death that I've lost, like death has definitely affected relationships that I've had, and sometimes it's been for the best to where it brings me and those people closer, and sometimes it makes it worse to where I don't talk to certain people today because of the toll that death has had on relationships in the past.
Yeah, it's the kind of the repercussions of the wake when these things happen, right? And the effect that it has on the person who, I'll say left behind, because I think that's the best way to really describe it. And the reality is, I've always viewed death as a destination that we're all heading towards. It's just some of us get there a little bit sooner. And that helps my grieving process when I lose someone that I love. I can say, we will eventually end up in the same place and meet up in the same place, based on my beliefs. I know everyone has different beliefs of where we actually go after, but it's comforting to me. And that's really with the idea of growing up is not, it doesn't romanticize childhood, which I appreciate, because I feel like too many people do that. And I really don't like it. People constantly tell me, man, wasn't like when we were kids, it was so great. It was so fun. Wouldn't you love to go back to that time? No, I wouldn't. I remember rules. I remember school and homework. I remember not getting enough sleep because of all the homework that I had to do. I am better rested, healthier, happier, more independent than I've been at any point in my entire life. And I would not give up any of that to go back to what? To not have a job? You still have to go to school. Like my job is way easier and more satisfying than school ever was. And this movie takes a microscope and looks at this one piece, this one summer of these kids, and shows the good and, the climbing trees and the jumping into ponds and the having fun and the coming of age growing up and the feelings you might start to have. This is on the really ugly and the uncomfortable and everything from, her getting her period for the first time to dealing with Thomas J's death. And Thomas J, like that scene, the actual bee sting scene, you see it briefly, and there's never a moment. I don't know if he really understands what's happening, because it's not indicated that he knows he's allergic to bees. They say earlier in the film he's allergic to everything. And so maybe on some level he knows this, but he never freaks out in the way of, I could die if I get stung. And then when they start swarming him, it almost like he seems like annoyed. He doesn't seem scared. Until maybe the last moment, and the camera cuts away, and then all of a sudden he's dead. So I'm just morbidly, I'm curious, is there a moment where Thomas J thought, oh my God, this is how I die, this is where I'm going to go? Or does he even fully understand the concept of not being alive anymore? It's something that, we didn't spend enough time with him in the movie to really get to understand.
Yeah, he's definitely a tertiary character in this movie, and it shows. But I want to go back to something that you talked about how this film doesn't romanticize childhood, and it definitely deals with hard topics. Like we've, we're two guys, so of course, we didn't understand the life alternating thing of getting your period for the first time. But from, all of the women that I've had in my life, whether I was, it was when I was a teenager or even as an adult, and hearing stories about how puberty has affected different women that have been in and out of my life, either platonically or romantically, have kind of always talked about how traumatizing that first period is. And so you have that with her. You have, as you said, Thomas J's death, and then you kind of have just the normalization of just death in and out of of her life with her father's business. But you look at other films that come out around this time, and even looking from like 10 years. So you have everything from Blank Check was another film that we set up in this poll, and other movies like Jungle to Jungle, Easy Wild Ride that definitely romanticizes childhood, Sandlot, Mighty Ducks. You also have Max Keeble's Big Move, I feel like was a big factor in that as well. And then you also kind of have Good Burger, another movie we covered earlier this summer that really, I feel like just kind of really did, and to your point, like as an adult, like there are some times where, yes, it sucks being an adult, but I've never been in a place, Dan, to your point, where I feel more mentally, emotionally, creatively, spiritually, and just physically more positive and just at peace with myself than I've ever felt at any point in my life. And I think that the company I keep, the job that I have, the environment that I surround myself with, and kind of the choices that I make as an adult have largely considered that. And we've talked about on and off over the last year how environments shape you as an individual. And some of the things that, some of the choices that I made and some of the environments that I surrounded myself with, either willingly or unwillingly, as a young boy growing up into a young man, definitely affected me, and not always for the best.
Yeah, I mean, the nature versus nurture argument, you have people, I have 5 brothers total, and some of them are half brothers. I have one whole brother, but we are vastly different people, but all got similar upbringings. My half brother's a little bit different. They had there's a bit of an age gap generation there too. They were basically grown by the time when I was born. But my brother and I are very different people, but we got similar upbringing. We were in the same house, had the same parents, but we turned out very differently. And so I think that there's a way that events shape you, but the way that your mental state and how you react to those events also affects how those affect you. I mean, it becomes very cyclical in that way. What I like is in this movie, prior to this conversation, and Josh, you opened my eyes to a couple of the key things here that I think are important, in that Veda not understanding death, Thomas J really helping her. We see earlier in the movie she's being teased by the group of girls on bikes. So she's hanging out with Thomas J. They're teasing her about it. And then there's that one girl who doesn't want to tease her. She wants to be friends, but doesn't quite speak up. And then by the end of the movie, they're able to get to, she says, oh, do you want to hang out? Do you want to see a movie? Do you want to go wherever? And then the movie, literally the credits start rolling with them riding their bikes down the street, and that's the end of the movie. And they play the song My Girl, as the name of the film is. So you have, like, did Thomas J need to die for her to make other friends? Is that the moral of this? Like, she wouldn't have grown out of her comfort zone, I guess, if she wasn't maybe pushed in that direction. I don't know.
Well, I think to your earlier point, she definitely kind of views herself almost as one of the adults. The way that she kind of has sense of humor, and the way that there's even a point too where it's a scene where Shelley, Thomas J, and her are sitting on the front porch and they're playing cards. And Shelley turns to her and says, you don't have to take that. She's like, oh, no, I prefer to surround myself with intellectual beings, and kind of looks at Thomas J, and he looks at Shelley, and he's just kind of like shrugs. But yeah, I think that kind of there's also a point in her where Thomas J, she really has to also grow as an individual, to where she kind of sees the world as an adult, because she's constantly surrounded with adults. And I think the inclusion of another female girl that's her age, kind of, and also with the acceptance of Shelley as a stepmom, kind of those two events amalgamizing in the end. I think I just made up a word.
I like it.
Really do kind of shape and mold her to slow down and understand and value childhood.
I think a lot of people, when they're kids, they want to grow up super fast, wicked fast, if I may allow my Boston to come out of me. But
wicked.
They you know, I'm not going to backpedal on what I said earlier. I do think being an adult rocks, and it's way better than being a kid. But you have there are moments of childhood that I think, as a kid, if you have the time to just slow down and just enjoy the state that you're in. Specifically summer vacation, that's like maybe the one thing, like I wish I could just, you know, not work for 2 months and just do whatever I wanted. That would be really cool. And, you know, maybe someday I'll be flexible and hopefully rich enough to be able to just be like, yeah, June, July, I don't really feel like working those months. We'll just go, you know, sailing. I don't know how to sail a boat, but Abby does. So that will be helpful. It's good to, you know, really cherish the good times and know that the bad times will pass, which I also think is just good advice for anybody of any age, because you're all going to experience highs and lows of life. There's no way around it. And you need to face every pitfall, every tragedy with the idea of, you know, you have been through a lot to get where you are, and you're going to get through this too. You just need to push past it, find the support where you need it, reach out for support if you need to, and get to a more positive, better place that will ultimately make you a stronger, more satisfied person. And I think that's what we're seeing with Veda on the other side of this movie, is after kind of accepting the passing of Thomas J. And neither of us have seen the sequel yet. I do kind of want to check it out, but we can kind of maybe get a glimpse of what she is a few years down the line. I believe she's 14 in that movie. It takes place 3 years after this. And having read the synopsis, I know she digs into a bit about her mother and her mother's death and kind of coming more to terms with that. But I would like to see, you know, what is her middle school life? What is her high school life like, having lost this friend at a young age? How does she explain that to new friends that she meets? How long does she wait to explain that to new friends that she meets? That, you know, I had a best friend, he died, and, you know, now here is where I am. It really sets the stage for every new friendship and relationship kind of moving forward. When you have something that impactful happen to you at that age, it's inevitable. It's going to come up at some point. And so it really dictates kind of how you're, you know, forming all those new relationships.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree. You know, death is going to, like we've been saying, I think is going to just impact and have a foothold on your life and kind of how you process things moving forward. And I think for Veda, we definitely, I would definitely like to kind of explore the sequel, whether we do it professionally like we're doing now, or just independently kind of talk about it elsewise. But I think that it's really interesting to kind of talk and see specifically what how his death impacts, and kind of also like how you know, her relationship with her father, which is something we haven't really talked about in this, but it kind of seems like he also doesn't understand how to process death, because the way that I interpret it, him losing her mother is kind of like there's a part of him that just kind of shut down, and his brother talks to, I believe it's Veda at one point in the movie, and says, you know, I haven't seen your father this happy since your mother, when referring to like his new romantic relationship with Shelley. And you can kind of see that like Shelley's really bringing something out in him that he's able to kind of finally start to recognize that, hey, maybe I should process things, because there's almost kind of this disjointment between their relationship. And I think that, it's really hard, and it's really awkward to talk to someone about death, sex, mental health. There's a number of topics that are just really hard to talk about. But I think that sometimes we need to address those topics and really be able to step into the awkward and embrace it, because I can tell you from experience that it's going to make the foundation of that relationship that much stronger. And I think you kind of see that. And I think that being able to approach stigmatic topics between two close individuals is only going to make that relationship stronger.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Where would you rank Dan Aykroyd's performance in this film on the large lexicon of movies that he has been in? Is this more like toward the Ghostbusters side of the spectrum? Is this more like Trading Spaces? Where does this fall for you?
That's such a loaded question. My favorite Dan Aykroyd performance of all time, and I get a lot of crap for this, is small role, but it's I can't remember the guy's name. He's the audio parts king from Tommy Boy. I love him in that. This I kind of would say this is kind of middle of the line. I really love when more comedic actors come and take on and do the dramatic roles. I think that his performance in this is definitely a highlight in this film. I've definitely seen Jamie Lee Curtis in better things. But Dan Aykroyd, I think, is probably the best performance in this movie. So I kind of would put it middle of the line, not quite to Ghostbusters, but not quite Trading Spaces. It's Trading Places. It's kind of right in the middle of it. Is he's not quite peak, but he's not quite
I would say
nostalgic.
The Great Outdoors is a few ticks above this film for me, but it's almost in that spectrum. But I would still say I like The Great Outdoors more.
Yeah, this movie it's really hard to kind of gauge, because again, I think we've kind of reached the same conclusion that it feels baffling that this movie has had the legacy that it does.
Yeah, and I mean, just looking at some of the stats, so right now, the movie is a 53% on Rotten Tomatoes. When it came out, Roger Ebert gave it a 3.5 out of 4. However, if you want to look at some of the more recent ratings on Amazon Prime Video, it has a 4.8 out of 5 with 87% 5-star reviews and 8% 4-star reviews. I wanted to click into the 1-star reviews. Well, here's the thing, because I like to get both opinions. So I clicked into 1-star. Almost every single one is about either the DVD not playing or the stream not working. And like, that's what they're rating. So it's not that it's a 1-star film. It's just that their product that they got was 1 stars. There were like 2 1-star comments that were just about the movie. And one was literally just like, the best friend dies. This is so sad. So it's like, okay, so you don't like sad movies. Doesn't mean it's a bad movie. But no, this movie is just so universally praised and loved. And I mean, to an extent, I get it. But at the same time, I'm happy I revisited this movie. This is not something... There are movies that I watch frequently and I rewatch frequently. This is not a movie that, like, if I'm having a party with friends, like, I'm not going to put this on the TV to be like, hey, check out this cool movie, like Macaulay Culkin. Like, I would do that with Home Alone. I would do that with Hot Fuzz. I'm not going to do it with My Girl. It's not the right film for that.
Oh no, not in the slightest. Like, this is a heavy movie, and like there are scenes that I was trying to pull this up because I am genuinely curious what IMDb has to say user wise. But while it's loading, this is a movie that's really heavy, and I'm glad that we were able to cover it for the podcast because I think it does bring up very valuable topics to talk about, like when to talk to your kids about death, how we process death, how we grieve, and kind of how that trauma affects the relationships between not only our own relationships, but the relationships we had between us and the deceased. I think it works really well on that term. But yeah, I so far all I'm seeing is like 10 out of 10. There's like no filter for this. The lowest I'm seeing so far is a 6.
People love this movie, man. They love it so much. That's what I'm telling you. I feel like this movie, so it came out, what was the release date? November 27th, 1991, per Wikipedia. So that's like, the Berlin Wall had come down, the USSR was collapsing, and the holiday season was approaching, and people were like, man, we need to take our mind off world events. Hey, the Home Alone kids in a new movie. Let's go check that out. Oh no, this is much sadder than Home Alone. But I feel like, I don't know, maybe it got people thinking, talking, discussing at the time about just what this movie means, what the character of Veda represents, and or they just saw it and ate their popcorn and never talked about it again. I don't know. Like, it could go either way here. And it's just, it makes me want to just, if I could visit, technically, yes, I was alive. I was in my first year of life. But if I could go back now in time and just sit in a movie theater during the holiday season in 1991, I'd be so curious to see what the crowd was thinking and feeling at that state and time.
All right, so I have one here. It's a 1-star review.
All right, we found
10,
one,
and it took me a long time. It's like a page and a half. It's like buried under like perfect reviews. So, this is from October 26, 1998, and it is called "Sticky Sweet Insult." This was a waste of. I guess I should also say that this is written by Me Po Zoid.
So wait, was this posted to IMDb in 1998?
Yes.
So was this like the first online film review ever that you tracked down?
I don't know, actually. Let me see. No, because it's weird the way that IMDb is like set up, because like you can't quite like filter by like the ratings, and like they jump from like 1998 to like 2002.
Yeah.
But, quote, "This was a waste of money to see in theaters, and I urge everyone out there to see a real tearjerker like Ghost or The Cure instead of this sticky sweet insult to good filmmaking. Or read the book version, My Girl, which was a worthwhile read. Why did I dislike this film so much? It was predictable. Too much time spent on warning parents that My Girl had a sad ending at the expense of a darn good surprise. The performances, frankly, stunk, except for a few choice moments by Veda's uncle.
The dialogue was immature, the plot was choppy, and tended to focus more on what horrific brat the main character was rather than the friendship between Veda and Thomas J. I read the original script. The film was supposed to end with the line, "My mother will take care of him," screamed from a distance when Thomas J's mother returns Veda's ring. It was heartbreaking. We never see Veda mourn. Other complaints, the filmmakers try too hard to see Veda's dad as a nice guy, even though in the original script he was portrayed as a cold, heartless man who ruined Veda's childhood. I would still argue that a lot of those core values still exist in Aykroyd's performance. Getting back to the review, which would have been much more believable. Shelley was supposed to be about 20 years younger than she was portrayed in the film. The filmmakers also switch rapidly back and forth between how adult the children are and how childish the children are. Some films do this artfully, realistically. See Welcome to the Dollhouse for a good example. However, with Thomas J. and Veda, it felt like a lack of decisiveness. Should we cater to the kids who will watch this because of Culkin, or should we cater to the adults who will watch this because of Curtis? Well, let's try and cater to both. This film could have been lots of all kinds of things: thought-provoking, heartbreaking, funny, nostalgic. Instead, we are handed one objective that sums up My Girl all too well: sappy.
Wow, that was a journey that person took us on. I think the biggest takeaway I took from that is that there is a novelization of this movie that apparently we have to read. I think we have to start a book club next.
Man, my book, like books that I have to read are like longer, have probably more miles on them than my car does.
Yeah, I'm in the midst of just a bunch of young adult fiction right now and having a great time. But oh man, that's like a My Girl novelization. Like, I know they're not the same movie at all, but that's like if they like made a Fast and Furious novelization. Like, that's a book I would read or listen to, especially if Vin Diesel did the audiobook. That's something that is just like I didn't know I needed, but now I want. And okay, so here's the Amazon description for the book. When your dad's an undertaker, your mom's in heaven, and your grandma's got a screw loose, it's good to have a friend who understands you, even if he is a boy. We haven't even touched. That's the thing. This movie is so bonkers. We haven't even touched on the grandmother, who is both such like a tertiary character. We nearly completely forgot her, but at the same time has just like those literal show-stopping moments where she'll start singing. And with Alzheimer's and dementia, like, you could relate to that. Like, that's just how life becomes at some point.
Yeah, to your point, this movie, she completely just uproots this movie, tonally speaking, and just like it still grounds itself in like reality, because like there are definitely grandmas and grandpas out there that have these types of conditions, and I think it really makes this film last in realism a whole lot more. But it does, there are just moments that just take you off guard because of like how little the narrative acting is. It's not the Thomas J's funeral, but like she just kind of goes into some random guy's funeral and just decides to start screaming at the top of her lungs. And Dan Aykroyd's just reaction is priceless in that scene. But yeah, it's wild. And that Amazon description, like, no, it makes me want to stay far away from that book.
Well, hang on, because I'm reading further now, and this is where things kind of take a turn. So another part of the synopsis, it's Veda and Thomas J, the two are always together, sharing their afternoons, their adventures in the lake, and all of their secrets. Then something terrible happens to Thomas J, and Veda has to learn to fill her days without her best friend around. So does the book, like, does it begin with the end of the movie and then we get her processing his loss? It's like $20 on Amazon, but I might have to pick this up and just like, I'll text you what it's like, because I'm so curious now.
Wow, yeah, I think that might have actually been more worthwhile to kind of check out because, like, again, like say what you will about this review, like this individual is absolutely correct. Is that we don't ever get to see Veda process. Like we are just kind of left given this, oh, everything's okay because we had this brief exchange between Thomas J's mom and Veda, and she's now gone off, and that's not how death or grief processes. Like it took me years to process some deaths, and the particular death that I brought up of my grandmother in the beginning of the show, like I had seasonal depression around her death for almost 10 years. Like it took like almost like lots of like prayer and like lots of like conversations between my wife, who I was dating at the time, and just different people about like healing to where like I didn't feel seasonal depression and I got closure for that grief. So like the fact that like she gets to ride off in the sunset kind of feels insulting to me as a viewer.
I think that the way that they show Thomas J's parents grieving, at first watching the movie, my gut reaction was these two have just lost their child, which is one of the most traumatizing things a person can go through. But like you just said, Josh, the way that people process and grieve is different for everyone. And I don't believe there is a right or wrong way to showcase your emotions, especially at a funeral, especially at a burial. That is going to manifest in different ways, and people have different ways of grieving. Personally, I have made a point to tell a joke at every single funeral I've ever been to, because I need on the darkest days, I need to be able to help me out, so far. I think getting through this movie, I had one of the final scenes of Thomas J's mother giving her decoder ring, or her mood ring rather, and saying, oh, we found Thomas J on here. We found it on him. So now Veda knows she went back to the bees looking for the ring. He found the ring. Because he was searching for it, he died from the bee stings. So now it's like, okay, so you just you traumatize this girl all over again, because now could potentially blame herself for his death over the place at times, and it feels really strange.
Yeah, I agree. There's one last thing that I just want to say, and I don't want to give up, and it's a line that Shelley says to Dan Aykroyd's character at the end, where he's kind of at a loss with not really knowing how to deal with Veda and processing Thomas J's death. And she says, life is more than just death. Don't give up on the living. And I just want to encourage everyone right now listening to this and watching this. It's really easy to give up on people, but we're all humans. We all make mistakes. And, sometimes we never know really what sticking with someone and just being their friends really gonna do. And I think that we kind of see that at the end with the little girl character who befriends Veda. Is okay, here you have someone that is stepping into the Thomas J role, but know that clearly here is someone in need of a friend, and that she didn't want to give up. And so I just really want to talk to, we have resources that we have been putting down below on the video chat and in the chat also for the last hour or so. Please just understand that, don't give up.
I couldn't agree more. I think I don't have much else to really say. I think we've almost spent as long as the movie was talking about the movie at this point. So, final thoughts. What's your rating? Would you recommend this movie to people who have not seen it yet?
Well, this movie is now streaming on Netflix as of this recording. I just want to throw that out there. It's been on Netflix for a while, so I don't know how much longer it'll be on Netflix, but that's where I watched it. I'm assuming that's where you watched. 0.5. I feel like this film does a lot of stuff really well. I think that it handles itself fairly well when it comes to pacing and its thematic elements, but its acting and its tone isn't always the right for me. So what about you?
I would give this probably a solid 3 out of 5 Rorschachs. I think 3 for me is it's good. It's a good movie. I don't think it is this unbelievable, amazing classic that I think people have kind of things well. It just kind of misses the mark in some other areas, but there are some charming and funny moments that I think are important to have, and it could be a good catalyst to discussing death and loss and all that. I think in the last 30 years, there are maybe better examples that you could pull from, just from the ginormous lexicon of pop culture that we have available to us at this point. But it's definitely a good movie, and I'm happy I watched it. I'm happy we broke it down here tonight together, because it's always fun coming on here to talk films, and this is one that I had not seen fully ever, so it was really cool getting to catch up with it.
Yeah, in terms of something that you were just talking about, there are episodes of both Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers that have also discussed death and kind of how to approach the topic with younger children.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to throw those out there. I don't know what episodes they are. Just Google Mr. Rogers' death or death episodes, because I'm sure you'd get the obituary for Fred Rogers' death if you did that. But yeah, just like the show name and then like death episode, I think you get some really positive hits on that one. Thank you to Kate Webster for providing that information recommendation. Dan, where can people find you online?
You can find me over on Twitter at dan-ayrokd, or if you want to read any of my video game op-eds, features, reviews, everything else I'm doing, you can find me over at the Tech Raptor website, techraptor.net. So check out all my stuff there. Hit me up on Twitter if you ever want to talk or anything like that. And yeah, otherwise you can find me here on the Victims and Villains podcast.
Yep, you guys can follow me. I am on TikTok at Gentleman Ghostface, and you guys can follow me on Letterboxd and Instagram as well at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can follow us everywhere at Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. And go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can get all of those information, all the social links, plus wherever you guys get your podcast from. That website's not only going to get you all that information, more podcasts like this, movie reviews, and ways to support us on Patreon, but most importantly, it's also going to help you find our mental health. Until next time, remember, keep talking nerd, talking hope, speaking nothing else. I'll see you guys.